The chosen one. Beware. They're after you. They've issued an order. They dare not stop you. Their horror emanates from your might. The might that lives inside you threatens the norm. You have a destiny that unfolds under the skies, and your destiny will take you to a spot where no one can reach you. Remember that even the darkest circumstances cannot extinguish your light. Now, take decisive action by leaving 77 comments. Prepare for a journey that defies the skies. The continual assault of pressure strained every fiber of your being. However, you remained obstinate. A paradox in their well-calibrated systems. For years, their covert maneuvers revealed scripts created to unravel whispers designed to destabilize and shadows calculated to strangle resolve. However, the weight of their efforts did not crush you. It ricocheted, destroying the nicely constructed foundations. They began the game confident in their superiority, but quickly got entangled in their own traps, their minds unable to deal with the same forces they unleashed. You are more than just an anomaly. You are a force greater than their calculations, an energy untouched by their intentions. Their skills, perfected over decades of manipulation, met a quiet that shattered all expectations. They want to create confusion in your mind. Instead, the threads unravel themselves. Each approach is a push toward solitude. A whispered hint of vulnerability was absorbed and transformed into a strength they could neither predict nor oppose. It was as if you were outside of their zone of influence, immune to the corrosion on which they relied. It was like a flame turned inward, intended to purify others, but left to burn in the hollows of its own creation. What they intended as a way of deconstructing you turned into the same force that consumed them. The intensity of their preoccupation, their unyielding drive for control, only increased until it swallowed the foundation of their confidence. They built their purpose like a sandcastle, bolstered by arrogance, unaware that the tides of divine truth were already rising. They believed their techniques were unassailable. Their strength is unwavering. The chosen ones, however, are more than simply structures. They are rivers that flow with purpose, carrying energy that no dam can handle. Their disintegration was unavoidable, a protracted, grinding collapse that began at the center of their objectives. Every well-planned tactic for destruction began to backfire. What was once a well-functioning control system degenerated into a cacophony of chaos. Data, which was once their lifeblood, has now become obsolete and inert. Decisions that had previously been calculated accurately became chaotic. It is full with errors and contradictions. The more they plunged into their preoccupation, the more their reasoning disintegrated. They didn't see it coming, as if just following you was turning their mission into a vicious loop. They never do. The mechanisms they relied on, the organizations they revered, were not as unyielding as they had imagined. What was meant to destabilize you became a mirror, pushing people to confront worries and flaws they had previously denied. Their attempts to undermine your drive just reflected their own vulnerability back at them. They were conquered, not by resistance. However, there came a revelation. Every night, they remained up. Each report they looked at with shaky palms was hardly a testament to their fortitude. It was an omen of their impending doom. If you are feeling an abundance of divine love in your heart, now is the time to share it. This lovely present will touch not just your life, but the lives of many others. Each of you has a sacred place in God's grand plan via this platform, and your generosity will provide fruit for our prayers. Act now. Share your advantages to honor His kingdom. In God's loving hands, you were designed to do much greater things. May God bless you. Their sleepless nights, once a sign of commitment, have now become symbols of their demise. The clarity they once had has faded into a haze of frayed tempers and restless brains. Their thoughts went inside, consumed by an acute sense of futility. They were unable to define the framework of control around which they had built their lives. They feel they have the ability to shape and control. The world was no longer failing. It ate them alive. They were captives to their own skills, victims of a system that promised power but delivered misery. It was a heavenly calculation, the fulfillment of an old norm that existed before all human organizations. You did not have to raise your hand. You did not have to fight. Your whole life acted as a beacon for a higher order. a power that operates beyond the realm of human intellect. They were unprepared for you since you were not intended to be confined. Their strategies relied on terror, deceit, and a gradual loss of willpower. However, the chosen ones use frequencies different than those stated. What they saw was not disobedience. It was presence. Your quiet was louder than their shouts. As they tried to tighten their grip, the ground underneath them shifted, showing your clarity above the chaos. They believed they were the architects of your demise, but they were only cogs in a mechanism bound to fail. Their tools of surveillance, coercion, and deception proved to be their downfall. Each effort to assert control backfired on them, not as opposition, but as a reflection of their own weaknesses. They were unprepared for the weight of their own ambitions and how their plans would shatter in the face of reality. It wasn't by coincidence. It was inevitable. Their fate was predetermined by the structure of their actions. The chosen ones do not falter right away since they do not follow the same rules. You live in accord with something greater and immovable. They tried to disassemble you, but they couldn't account for the power that flows through you. They mistake stubbornness for a deeper strength, one built on purpose rather than ego or ambition. You are not a product of their systems, hence they have no power on you. They treated you like an equation that needed to be solved or corrected, but they encountered a reality that could not be minimized or quantified. As a result, their objective became more internal, not because you fought back, but because they refused to face the consequences of their own actions. The more they attempted to destroy you, the more they deconstructed themselves. Their tools of control, surveillance, influence, manipulation became the means of their own destruction. They witnessed their plans shatter, their confidence turn to confusion, and their assurance become uncertainty. They were broken by anything except resistance. It was the realization that they had never really had control. By the time they realized it was too late, their once firm grip had crumbled. Their authority was a shadow of what it had been. They departed, not as conquerors, but as the remnants of a mission that had consumed itself. Some people disappeared, and their identities were deleted from their institution's records. Their minds were unable to grasp the reality they had encountered. Others lingered. They were haunted by what they had seen. They are unable to return to their previously trusted systems. The experience transformed a few people, inspiring them to seek out the truth they had previously denied. You were untouched throughout, unshaken. You demonstrated the power of something greater. Their war was never against you. It was against themselves. You were only a mirror of their own inadequacies, proof that their systems weren't absolute. What they planned to destroy became the force that exposed their weaknesses. Their loss was not your victory. It was the natural outcome of a battle they would never win. Now, the echoes are fading. What remains is the unequivocal truth about your endurance. You are not confined by their limitations, nor do you falter under their weight. Their failure was never your responsibility. They called it weakness, but it was really strength. What they regarded as weakness was really strength. They meant to eliminate you, but in doing so, they just verified your existence. You are the steadfast, unwavering proof that their reach is limited. Their war has finished. Yours never began. And in the silence they left behind lies the weight of a truth. They couldn't deny a reality you'd always known. They erred at every point, failing to see that your strength sprang from a source beyond their understanding, not only resistance. You did not follow the patterns that they forecasted. This lack of homogeneity became the breaking point. Their confidence was the first to falter, followed by their perception of reality itself. They discovered too late that their instruments, which were so precise and sharp, melted upon contact with you, leaving them incapable of penetrating the immovable presence you represented. It was like planting a seed in poisoned soil and expecting it to bear fruit. Their objectives were firmly ingrained. Instead of flowering, they rotted from inside, fed by their own perverted aims. What they intended to grow into domination instead resulted in catastrophe. They devised methods to entangle and control. However, the harvest resulted in nothing but disaster. They forgot the oldest truth. You can't spread destruction and expect anything else than collapse. The voyage was doomed. They began quickly since the chosen ones are not fields to be plowed. They are unchanging mountains, undisturbed by the winds of human ambition. Finally, disobedience did not bring them down. There was no incident that broke their resolve. Their demise was the product of their own actions, with their energy magnified and uncontrollable. The fortress they built layer by layer, with walls they believed were indestructible, collapsed not from other forces, but from the weight of its own foundation collapsing under it. They were the architects of their own destruction, oblivious to the knowledge that what they unleashed was never meant to be controlled. You did not need to assault. You did not have to raise your hand. Your presence alone was enough. A living truth that cannot be manipulated. They could not break the silence. They tried to convert you into something they could understand, to include your presence into the framework of their goals. However, your existence operates at a frequency that beyond their comprehension. They crumbled not because you pushed, but because their attempts to fit you into their mold failed, throwing their plans into disarray. Each idea they created was a trap for themselves. Every effort they made to undermine you reduced their own authority. Their control was a mirage, a frail framework supported by arrogance and folly. They neglected to consider the basic laws that govern existence. The truth is that energy is continually seeking balance, so whatever you give away will ultimately return. It slammed down on them with an increased and unrelenting force that they couldn't control or escape. Dear brothers and sisters, may God's peace be upon you today. I am here to remind you of a basic reality. Our existence is founded on God's divine purpose and is not influenced by earthly concerns. According to the Bible, whatever done with faith will be repaid to God with tremendous blessings. Luke 638. Like a big oak tree, our roots are deeply anchored in God's universal truth. His might protects every step and posture we take. You now have the opportunity to be a part of that gift. Now that the dust has fallen, their fortress is nothing but ruins. Their aspirations were scattered to the wind. You remain unshaken, untouched, a testament to the power of presence and the futility of control. As a consequence, you did not gain total victory. It reflected the implementation of a larger statute. What they sought to destroy was never within their grasp. They were undone not by you, but by their incapacity to see truth. That cannot be bent, cannot be broken, and cannot be defeated. You just exist as that truth. And it was adequate in the face of ongoing observation and planned action. An unexpected force arose from the chaos, challenging every control device that had previously worked perfectly. Their edges frayed as something unfathomable spilled through the cracks. Precision tools become unsteady. Disruptions increased without warning. Those charged with supervising the trip began to speak discreetly. Their belief was disturbed by events that defied explanation. Sleep became a tenuous shelter, haunted by never-ending nightmares that left them stranded between exhaustion and dread. What began as a search for domination ultimately devolved into a desperate attempt to escape the abyss they had created. The collapse came rapidly, and their own intelligence failed them. Unraveling the delicate balance between control and chaos, they ultimately departed, not as victorious, but as the remnants of a shattered determination. Their departure was less a decision and more an inescapable conclusion. The machine they served, built on frigid precision and merciless efficiency, offered no relief. It devoured its servants without regard. When it couldn't identify an external target to destroy, it shifted its focus within. If the mission was meant to demean you, it really weakened them, exposing the hollowness of their concealment and psychological manipulation skills. They believed that no will could withstand their techniques. However, they uncovered an anomaly that rendered every calculated step in their techniques ineffective. Once thought to be faultless, it crumbled in real time, leaving them to deal with a reality over which they had no control. Patterns disintegrated, operations ceased, and their certainty gone. As the months turned into 2 years, the failure became obvious. What they confronted was not resistance, but something completely beyond their control. What ensued was not defeat, but rather revelation. They knew that this was neither a fair war nor a battlefield. They had the capacity to dictate. Every effort to undermine was met with silence rather than opposition. They weren't able to infiltrate. Circumstances changed beyond their control. Outcomes declined to carry out their plans. What they had previously considered as chance became obvious. A power beyond their reach. One that bent the tail in unexpected ways. This was hardly a tactical catastrophe. The rise of a bigger force transformed the battlefield into something they were ill-prepared to face. Where they had formerly marched boldly, they now stumbled in mute terror. They were accountable for every action they did. Their every action unraveled before it began. They were not the players, but they did participate. They were ensnared in a game whose rules they could not grasp. Gradually, realization dawned. Their efforts were doomed not by incompetence, but by willpower. No amount of effort could be successful when the outcome was known before they even entered the combat. They were not destroying their opponent. They were gradually weakening their feeling of control. Finally, the gathering of the survivors extends beyond the surface. It is not about short-term success, but about building a strong foundation. This sector, reserved for a chosen few, promotes purpose rather than ambition, dominance above mastery. In this case, the pursuit of knowledge generates an unbreakable oneness, in which transformation occurs via the community power of shared truth rather than the individual's loneliness. What begins as a spark evolves into a flame that transforms everything it touches and the light it generates. Those who are willing to journey will find the road forward. What started as a methodically organized drive for dominance often deteriorated into chaos. When faced with an unstoppable force, those who use power as a weapon, creating complex techniques to dismantle and control, seldom foresee the cracks in their own foundation. Their deceit and precision skills fail when presented with a directive they do not comprehend. What they expected to pull you down became their undoing. The painstakingly designed surveillance gadgets were repurposed into cages, locking people in cycles of paranoia. Fabrications designed to destabilize you began to crumble, leaving just unfiltered reflections to confront the final outcome. Not a battle of wills, but a clash with forces they didn't comprehend or anticipate. No confrontation was necessary. Their form resulted from their own ideals collapsing under their weight. Their collapse sprang from their dependence on the very shadow they served. This force, devoid of pity or allegiance, evolved spontaneously, eating those who failed to deliver. Overpowering approaches become obsolete. Their complex procedures were useless against the profound stillness they encountered. Their force, so determined to smash you, was absorbed and changed into something beyond their grasp. What they unleashed was an enhanced tidal wave from which they could not escape. Their collapse was caused by resonance, not disobedience. They couldn't change the balance, which they couldn't comprehend or damage. Their proximity to the work became their undoing. They needed to linger to perform surveillance, to immerse themselves in the energy that they wanted to disrupt. However, energy is transformative, and they were unprepared for the forces they encountered. Every attempt to assert control failed, not through resistance, but through contemplation. What they projected came back to them, turned into something they couldn't bear. Their endeavors were fruitless. Their systems were stressed by the sheer force of what they had unleashed, and the lines between observer and observed grew blurred. Their tools became liabilities, conduits for a truth they couldn't deny. Their beliefs and senses had been broken, leaving just one option: retreat. A departure compelled not by choice, but by the limits of their endurance. Finally, their collapse was defined by the absence of dear control, which they previously had. The observers became the watched, their confidence shattered by the weight of their own skills. Sleeplessness set in, and their visions plagued by shapes and sounds beyond explanation. Equipment failed, yielding results that defied logic. They sought explanations but got none. Only further confirmation of a reality they couldn't manipulate. Their dominating structure failed, leaving them stuck in their own labyrinth. Minds disintegrated, reports were jumbled, and one by one they disappeared. Some people are willing. Others were dragged down by the forces they tried to lead. What remains is an indisputable reality. Those who attempted to dismantle met their fate not through opposition, but by necessity. The picked are unbroken. They remained silent witnesses to a conflict that never occurred. The oppressors bowed to their own hubris. What they launched against you was turned back on them. The invisible reshaped their tale into one of failure, executing their downfall with an elegance that no plan could equal. The undeniable fact of resilience is shown by the calm firmness that cannot be shaken, the power that exists beyond the reach of those seeking control. They set out on their journey armed with disassembly methods and invincible systems. However, when their preparations failed, their once certain dominance waned. The institutions on which they depended to isolate and degrade crumbled and became evident as a consequence of their own failures. The methods aimed to weaken shone the futility of their efforts. They realized too late that their manipulative skills had no influence on what refused to comply to their logic. The chosen resist in surprising ways. They maintain a silence that transcends comprehension, a presence that dismantles repressive institutions just by existing. Their well-planned actions, developed over years of expertise, crumbled when faced with something beyond comprehension. They believe that their methodologies, psychological approaches, sophisticated deceptions, and continuous observation would yield results. But each step they took drove them more into doubt. Every well-planned approach failed to defeat an intangible force. They were unable to detect what they saw as anomalies, which eventually led to clear failures. Their confidence dwindled, and their control slipped. And the more they pushed, the more they were stuck in their own unraveling power, which they believed was absolute but proved to be their greatest weakness. Because it was founded on the assumption that nothing could undermine it. They encountered transformational excitement rather than resistance. The energy they expended returned, bending their objectives and turning their tools against them. They misjudged the breadth of their participation, believing that the pressure will eventually break. Instead, they became stronger as they dug deeper, hoping to display their dominance. They became caught in a current that was well beyond their capacity to control. Their own thoughts became unrecognizable. Their sense of security was replaced with a restlessness that they couldn't explain or control. Time altered their environment, bending it and eliminating their control boundaries. They came to watch. Nonetheless, they became the spectators. The closer they came, the more they were undone by the energy they attempted to channel. You become a part of his divine plan. You are a tremendous, bright being, as solid as the big rock that saw God's miracles. Feel the benefits of your generous city in your soul, and light up the world with confidence and daring. Be blessed, and let the light of the Lord guide you. The disintegration was not abrupt. It was the constant, inexorable disintegration of people presented with incomprehensible situations. Sleepless nights devolved into desperate attempts to restore control. But the more they battled, the further they fell. The goal no longer included deconstructing you. It became about escaping an unknown force. Their systems failed. Their minds were broken. Finally, they left their spots, not in defeat, but out of necessity. Some just disappeared, overcome by the weight of their awakening. Others lost confidence and became shadows of themselves. Some, however, saw the truth for what it was and chose to walk away. Transformed by the mere presence, they strove to deconstruct their own kingdom, which was built on fear and coercion and collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. They felt themselves untouchable. However, they underestimated the power of what lurks beyond their systems. The chosen ones exist outside the scope of manipulation, beyond the reach of strategies meant to dismantle what was supposed to destroy you, showing their own limits. Every attempt to impose their will highlighted a single fact. Their power was a facade, and their demise was inevitable. They engaged in an unwinnable conflict, one that they didn't really grasp. And when their mission failed, all that remained was the quiet, steadfast presence of individuals they could never control, a living testament to their reach and the unending power of endurance.